been introduced, my name is Noreen. Some people call me Judith. Noreen, Judith Sibanda. Those are my three names. And I'm a registered provisional psychologist here in Alberta, Edmonton, Canada. I primarily work in private practice, so I see people that just seek me out and decide that they would like to have someone to talk to, and we connect and we go from there. I also hold a few contracts around the community. One of them is working in a school where I literally drive 2 hours away from my house on those days to go work with an indigenous community outside of the city. I also have a contract with the Terra Center, and the Terra Center is an organization that aims to support parenting teens and pregnant and parenting teens through their journeys of becoming mothers. I am also the executive director of the Alberta Black Therapist Network, which is a network of professional therapists here in Alberta, and we aim to destigmatize mental health, but also increase access to the supports. With our various backgrounds, we are taking a decolonizing, cultural sensitive, and trauma-informed lens to the work that we do, and being really at the forefront of being part of the community. And we recognize that mental health is something that within the Black community is still not spoken about, but also continues to be something that we all struggle with, and we end up struggling with it in isolation. So we're really trying not only to be a network as therapists, because we need the supports, but also being a network to the community.
I was muted. That is so interesting that you say that therapists also need their own support, because you always assume that therapists are so strong and they have the tools, so they should be able to heal themselves. It's quite an interesting story. And I'm going to get back into that. I want everyone who's just joined us to say hi, tell us your name, where you're watching from, and if you're watching the live or you're watching a replay. So to get us started, I'm going to read out something which someone posted in the AfroFemme group this week. And it was by Tubelihle, and she said, she looks at herself in the mirror and all she sees is the pain etched on her face. Her eyes are a reflection of her brokenness. She smiles, but beneath her smile is a cry for help. She yearns to be held close so all that pain can magically disappear. Every time she closes her eyes, those words keep coming back to her. She hurts deeply, but is afraid to speak out because someone will look at her and say, "Where are the scars?" The truth is, the scars are not physical. They remain buried deep in her heart. No one can touch them, but she lives with them every day of her life. She carries them everywhere, and they're a constant reminder of her lost self.
Wow.
Noreen,
Wow.
yeah. What is trauma?
Well, I think we have to start by actually acknowledging that trauma doesn't have to be the big T trauma. It could be a small t. And trauma is any experience really that disrupts the normal functioning. And trauma isn't about the event. Rather, it is the emotional response to the event or to a situation that happens. And when you read that passage, I was deeply touched. First of all, thank you for being very vulnerable and letting us into that space, because wow, that is something that probably most people think about or have experienced, but struggle to actually put into words. And I think a big part of trauma is the body remembers the trauma. The body knows the trauma. And sometimes we lack the words to communicate to other people what it is that we're experiencing. And I think Tuba put it beautifully, in explaining that the scars are invisible. Here's a very interesting thing about trauma. It has the same impact as a physical harm or physical hurt. It ignites the same part of your brain that would actually light up, let's say you burnt yourself by the stove. Because just because it doesn't leave a scar doesn't mean the brain hasn't registered the scar. The scar is there.
That is so profound that you said, and something that I caught from what you said is that we always think trauma is this big event of the big T, to say, I had a traumatic event in 1991, this happened to me. But it can be the small T of something which you just respond to, and it doesn't even have to be a big thing. So it's not about the event, it's about your response. So it must be true then that some people would respond differently to the exact same event. Like someone may be traumatized to an event, but someone else, the same thing happens, but they're not even bothered about it. What makes people react differently to traumas?
Well, part of it is the foundation that's in play. So as I said, the body remembers. We have to acknowledge that none of us have evolved to live in the worlds that we live in. First of all, here we are communicating worlds apart and having this conversation, which is something that we don't know that it's a normal thing, right? So our brains have evolved to look at things that we normally would say it's not traumatic as traumatic, because our brains don't know the difference. So let's say we happen to shift virtually to Kruger National Park right now, and someone is like, oh yeah, we forgot to close the cage for the tigers. Our brains are like, let's survive, right? So the way our brain really works is about how to keep us safe. But the world has taken care of most of those environmental factors that were previously a safety concern. And now everything else almost becomes another traumatic or, excuse me, another thing that could potentially be harmful to us. So the brain doesn't think of Zoom as, oh, it's safe, you are in your home. It could still be as traumatic as being in Kruger National Park. And the reason why we deal with it differently is because our environments have either exposed us to different things, and we learn so much from trauma. And when I say trauma in this case, I'm not even referring to the big traumatic event, but the accumulation of little things. So I'll give you a concrete example. As a kid, and this is going to sound a little privileged, but there's a point to it. As a kid growing up, I didn't like food was not my thing. So my dad would say, until you finish your plate, you don't move from the table. And so to me, food became something that I didn't have a healthy relationship with. I would sit there and think about how scary eggs are, because I had to put them down so that I would be let go, right? And an accumulation of that experience kept telling me that food is not safe. Food is not safe. So then it took a very long time to even get to a point where I look at food and say, this is something I need to nourish my body, but not something that I'm forced to actually do so that, as African parents say, to grow and all of that. But it wasn't a healthy relationship based on the interactions that I've had. So someone else might see that and be like, why are you even bothered by that? It's because they had a different upbringing. Their environment told them differently about trauma. So some of the things that trauma tells us, one is we're not good enough, that we don't have what it takes. The world is not safe. People are not to be trusted, right? So even with the simple example of like eating, you can see those themes coming through of how do I trust that if I sit down and you offer me food,
can I play?
Okay, Masha. Sorry, I think this. Sorry, continue. There was some experience there.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, how do I trust that a simple gesture is someone offering me food and say, coming, let's share a meal together, is something that's going to be pleasant, because the foundation that I have is food isn't safe. And my brain coded that as unsafe, because our brain has to do the difficult work of, are we safe, are we not safe, in a matter of seconds. And we don't want to lose that, because it's an important part of how we function. I want my brain to tell me to get off the street if a car is coming, because it knows that that's not a safe environment. But then if it tells me don't eat because it's unsafe, then it becomes more problematic.
Okay. So the way I understand it is our childhood experiences or things that happen to us, they train us to respond in a certain way. So for instance, your food experience. So tell me this, when you were told it as a child, don't eat, or you were told to eat, finish your food now. So what kind of response did that have on you as an adult?
And I'm taking a deep breath, because obviously this is a vulnerable moment to be sharing all of that. A big part of it is I'm eating to appease my parents. So I'm not eating because I enjoy food. So my experience, my emotions did not become important. What was important was to make sure that my dad, my mom were okay with me. So then I learned to control myself in order to control other people's emotions as a response as well. So I'm no longer feeling or allowing myself to be, because all I do is to ensure that I'm okay so that my environment is safe.
Wow. This makes more, it's more complicated than I thought. Okay. It's not just about an event. It's about your response to trained events, trained, your mind was training yourself to keep safe. So when you experience it again, then there's a reaction from you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing a vulnerable side of you. So you're saying that trauma doesn't always look like a physical big issue. We're just going through the 16 days of gender activism that started 2 days ago. And everyone is talking about gender-based violence, and it goes with the cases, sexual abuses, the assaults and all that, but it's not always that. So what kinds of trauma is there? What kind of things have you seen in your practice as a psychologist that maybe things which are different that we don't realize are also trauma? Just share with us those experiences.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think we assume that it's going to look the same for everyone. It's different. And again, this example is not meant to put my family on blast or anything, but I think it's a great example. I, for one, am used to an environment being very loud and knowing that there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the background. So when I have to sit in silence, it doesn't feel normal, because then my brain says something isn't right. Go check and make sure that everyone else is okay, because I'm used to an environment that's a certain way. And so because of that particular experience, I cannot concentrate on just one thing. So sometimes trauma can present itself as avoidance or distractions. And then, like I said, my environment has to be loud in order for me to feel like the environment is safe. So for some people, and I know it's happening more and more now, is you have to be on
Me.
You have, yeah. You have to be on your phone while on your computer while doing all of these things. So we're constantly like distracting and having more than one thing going on at the same time, right?
Yeah.
That's one way. Yeah. Or we analyze our emotions. And this one happens, I see it more as a parent. I'm not a parent myself, but my siblings have parents. As an aunt, where my siblings say to their kids, why are you crying? And that's teaching kids to say, your emotions do not have to exist unless you have a reason. So you learn to analyze your emotions instead of feeling them.
Wow. Wow.
So then, like, if I'm crying, I have to have a reason, and then I have to present it, because otherwise I'm not justified in my crying, because emotions are not just allowed to be. Another way you can see trauma being presented is through the blaming of others. And that is, I can't take accountability of my actions, and it is because of XYZ that I'm this way. And sure, I've used my families as examples. It's not their fault that I'm this way. I'm not blaming them, but rather saying, when someone blames others, it is, I have no control of the environment. And it is because I don't feel like I have control, other people are responsible for the way I feel.
Okay.
And I saw this one this week being posted on Facebook too, and it's a great one. Empathy. You become so empathetic towards other people's emotions. You are so in tune with others that you don't take care of your own emotions. You neglect how you feel in response for other people. So it's also a way, again, to maintain that safety. Think about someone who grew up in an environment where if you showed up home with a B, you'd get in trouble. So you do everything possible before the report cards come to make sure that you're in a good space. And you're in tune with how your parents are going to respond, that you make sure that they are okay before you are. So you don't even get a B or worry about the B because, hey, last time I got a C and now I've improved. It is, I got a B, it's not going to be okay. So I have to be in tune with how someone else is going to respond instead of seeing your own experience and validating it.
Wow.
Another one is state choosing.
Just to interrupt you there, you are giving us so many nuggets, and I feel like we need to dig deep into each, because it's like you're unpacking big topics, and I don't even know where to start. And what I want to ask ladies to do, if you're on the Facebook group, just put down what is resonating with you, what topics you want to go back to, because we're going to really dig deeper into all this. You were talking about how you want everything to be loud, for you to feel okay. When it's silent, you get like, what's happening? I am the exact opposite. I have to have complete silence, and I am so sensitive to noise. Like when my kids are crying, I can get into a state. It's you don't even understand. I would rather like be at the gate and drop something off than come in and they start crying when I have to leave again, because I can't stand the crying. Not that I don't want to be there for them, but it just grates, it grates on me. And I'm always constantly asking my husband to turn down the volume of whatever it is, TV, music. I cannot stand noise. So is that also a type of traumatic response? Like the way we are so different, would it explain that maybe for me, quiet is better, and for you it's the noise? Like how do you explain those coping mechanisms?
So a silence means there's peace. Silence means things are calm. When you actually have to deal with the loud or the sounds, then it is, I'm on alert, right? So it's no longer, I can allow myself to just be, I have to respond to all of these things. And your example about having to drop things off by the gate instead of see your kids, I don't think it's about not caring for them, which we know you do. It's not even about that. The thing is, when you see those emotions, then now you have to be in tune with your own emotions. And sometimes, one, there isn't time for that. There isn't space to be in that space with them, right? Here's the unfortunate thing. When kids are in that space and they experience that, they are also learning something from that experience.
Yes. Yes, therapy. I'm now going into my therapy session. Okay.
They are learning stuff from that experience. One, it is, okay, as a parent, I don't come into the house, I drop things by the gate. Two, when I see my kids having emotions, I don't actually go into the space that I sit with them. I actually leave them to deal with those emotions, or I leave them to UCC to deal with them, to help them through that, right? So then really,
No, but what I'm saying is, instead of them crying, I'd rather they don't even see me there
but
than,
why are you preventing a natural emotion from taking place?
because I don't want them to cry. I don't want them to cry.
Wrong with crying? What's wrong with crying?
Okay, tell me. I'm here to learn.
But remember what I said about that idea of like, what's wrong? Why are you crying, right? It's almost like you are not even allowing the space. If that's how they process their emotions, let them. And that's your way of saying, hey, I know you're attached to me and I'm attached to you, and we have this connection. And when you do feel that way, I want you to know that I value you and I still see you and I still care for you, even if I'm not in the presence of you. One of the things that happens, especially in North America, is parents put kids on timeout.
Okay.
And what it tells the child is, whatever has happened, your parent is not going to be there with you to deal with it. You go by the corner and deal with it by yourself. That is not an effective way of actually teaching anything, because what you have done is to remove the child from the experience. So if we go back to my example of like Kruger National Park, you take me out of the park now and you're like, oh yeah, you're safe now. That doesn't teach me how to actually become safe within myself, because you have done the hard work of taking me out.
So are you saying going to the Kruger National, I like that example. Instead of just being taken out of there, you're supposed to teach me how to deal with the wild animals, to deal with whatever might happen, so that I'm able to protect myself and know what tools I need for myself to deal with the situation.
Correct. And this is where most of the concerns in therapy come up. I don't know what it looks like. We all know what we don't want, but we don't know what it is that we want. And we don't know how that is going to look like. If you sit with me and say, hey, when you went into the kitchen and you were playing around with the sugar and it's all over the floor, that is not something that we do. And instead of putting you on timeout, I'm going to give you a moment to think about what you did, and I'm going to sit here with you. I'm here if you need me. It's difficult because at that point, as a parent, you are going through your own emotions.
Yeah.
And then I have to sit with my child in that space, right? We've almost been told to separate,
Yeah.
right? I remember the first time I saw my dad crying, I started crying too. And now I work with so many people that when they cry, I don't cry. And people are like, are you not emotional? I'm like, no, I'm emotional, but I don't have to join with you in your emotions to feel how you feel and understand how you feel. I know exactly how you feel, but I also cannot join with you because someone has to be composed, one, but someone also has to show me that it's okay for me to cry and hold that space for me, but also show me what it looks like to move from just crying to expressing myself.
Wow, okay. I'm just taking a moment because I've learned so much, and I understand that we are now trying to be there to discipline our kids in a way we were never disciplined. If we're talking about parenting and childhood traumas, yet we had so much, maybe the wrong way, or like we just did not experience this attention and this. let me go through, let me sit down with you and explain this and all that. So how do we be healed now? How do we have a healed generation raising up another generation when we ourselves need that? We are still looking for that validation. We're still looking for that safety, to be in that space to treat our children the way we should have been treated. So where do we start now?
I go back to acknowledge your own experiences, and it is okay. We're not here to blame parents. That's the last thing that we're doing. But what we have to do is sit with our own stuff and recognize that we have it. And here's what happens with trauma. Our default becomes what we experienced. And this is not to say people that are sexually abused too. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if my mom would yell when she was frustrated, even though I'm trying all these new ways of parenting, when I'm frustrated, I'm more likely to go back to that default of what I've seen, right? Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. When it happens, catch yourself, acknowledge it. Hey, so I was yelling. That's not how I want to communicate right now. And this is what I would want to do. And the biggest thing is we have to be willing to show our vulnerable sides so that kids can actually see that those emotions are okay. Like I mentioned, I didn't see my dad crying until a certain age. So then it was never like my parents cry, my parents have emotions. Even as a teen, when you're growing up, you're like, your parents don't get it because you don't see them expressing any of your emotions. So you almost feel like an alien that has all of these thoughts and feelings that no one else around you seems to have them. I didn't finish 2 ways that trauma gets also expressed. The last 2 are state changing. And this is where I don't want to feel any of my feelings. So I'll do everything possible to numb them. Drinking, drugs, smoking, eating, sex as a way of recognizing that trauma. And the last one is somatizing. And that is just a fancy way to say the trauma is seen in your body. So if you're constantly complaining about headaches, back pain, spine, achy shoulders, whatever it is, and it never seems like a massage or any physical treatment actually takes care of it, then maybe it is your emotions being expressed through your body. Because the thing is, as much as we evolve, our brains also evolve knowing the things that we do and the patterns that we have. If I have a headache, I'm going to take care of it. I'll take an aspirin. But if I am stressed out and I don't actually acknowledge that I'm stressed out, I'll only acknowledge or stop myself when I faint, because now it's a physical experience that I'm seeing. Then the body goes into that too. Like I will stop her through her tracks by actually stopping her physically. Right? So when it really comes to how do we start changing, we have to have the awareness of what's going on for us and why we react the way we do. It is not, oh, I'm just doing this because, or do as I say, as my parents would say, but it is more of, this is the reason why. And we're not analyzing our emotions, but we're explaining and recognizing that this is not the normal way of functioning. And if I get upset, I'm allowed to go back and say, hey, can we do that again? I didn't intend to just be shouting at you and not give you an opportunity to talk or express what you have to feel. Say it. Now I'm ready to listen. So we have to go back and fix the mistakes that we make, because our brains right now, what they're doing is the trauma response is really strong. So think of the road. Let's say there isn't an actual road that's paved and 2 cars drive through the same road that we're making. It starts to form a road, right? Because there previously wasn't anything. So what trauma does is the car keeps driving. And the more we drive, the more that road becomes the permanent road that we use. So what we need to do is to use a different road and keep using that one so that the previous one starts to grow grass and close up. And then the new pathway also becomes the one that's more prominent instead of the previous one. You're muted.
Apologies.
Okay.
So I was just saying that you say that there are ways that trauma can look like our responses, the bad and healthy eating, like you can just use food, alcohol, drugs, sex. So a lot of the time, what I find interesting is people come with addictions or they come with these problems, and we'll be spending all our time trying to solve the problem of food or the problem of alcohol, or you take drugs, you have a problem. Yet there's a reason behind. This is just someone trying to
Cope.
to cope, just
Yeah.
to survive what they went through. Is it the same? Do they then become addicted, or can we say once they heal from the trauma, that's the only time they're going to stop the unhealthy habit?
Yes. So I often put it out as some of the things that we see are just symptoms.
Yeah.
We can focus on the symptoms. But again, that's putting a band-aid on a symptom. And it's not actually healing it. Because and we're not generalizing here, but in most cases, it's either there's an underlying trauma or an attachment issue.
Okay.
And when those are addressed, then we can address how a healthy relationship with alcohol or food looks like.
Yeah.
Because how can we expect someone to know what it looks like when they haven't actually seen it? If all they've seen is the unhealthy, and that's the way they've normalized, or that's the life that they've lived in, how can we expect that we're going to come and change that? And the biggest thing is we often want to say, go from 0 to 100. But one, we have to come from a harm reduction. It's not about not doing the thing that you did, but recognizing why it was happening in the first place and why that road is a lot stronger than trying a new pathway. Because people can detox, people can try all of these methodologies that are out there, but what happens is when you put them back in the environment, they'll go back to what they're used to. Here is a prime example. In North America, they like to deal with homelessness with, oh, if you are off drugs, we'll find you housing. And then when you put me in a new house that doesn't have the people that I feel socially connected to, that doesn't have my things, you've given me all of this new furniture. None of it is me. None of it is my space. I would rather go back to sleeping under a tree instead of living in the house that you gave me. Because it's not actually taking care of all the biopsychosocial things that affect me as an individual. You cannot remove me from my environment and expect that it's going to take care of things. Even if you say, get rid of the alcohol, you haven't actually addressed the bigger issues that are in place.
Okay. So what would be the way to help, let's say, a homeless person, instead of just removing the alcohol and putting them into a good house? How would we then address it as we try to understand how we address our own traumas?
Mm-hmm. So we have to recognize that all individuals are going to be different. But the first thing is, what is the person connected with? And what is the alcohol connected with as well? If you realize most people don't smoke because they enjoy it. They smoke because that's the opportunity to engage in conversation with other people that are smoking. And that's the space that, that for whatever reason, that's the space that most of the rules or the norms of like, you just don't start talking to a stranger don't exist. That is probably the space that they feel the most comfortable, right? Because you can strike up a conversation by saying, hey, do you have a lighter? Hey, do you have a smoke? And then you start talking and it just flows from there, right? So if we're going to remove a homeless person from their home, their community where they're attached to, we're not helping. And we're going to put them miles and miles away so that they're not connected. That's not going to help. So we have to start by building and replicating the connections that they have, but in a healthier way, instead of putting them back into the same negative environment. So if it is about the community, you don't find them a house that is miles and miles away from where they're used to.
Yeah.
And a part of it is we want to make sure that the environment isn't a trigger itself.
Wow. Okay. We're talking about overcoming trauma and healing from trauma with psychologist and AfroFemme wellness expert, NOREEN Sibanda. We spoke about examples of North Africa, North America, homeless people, the way children are being raised. But I want to take us back to our roots. You're from Zimbabwe. AfroFemme is a platform for African women, but we also deal with anyone who lived in Zimbabwe, whether they are Black, white, it doesn't matter, but having that African experience. Is there anything about being African or our culture which puts us at particular risk for some traumatic events, which we might not know about, which we might not recognize? Is there anything that you've seen in your practice which we would need to be aware of because of where we're from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing that comes to my mind is even how certain things are approached or understood. And sometimes we use the lens of what is so and so going to think? How is this going to be perceived? So there's a big part where shame, our culture is very much shame-based, or almost allowing us to go into blaming others for our emotions. So it's almost like a blame culture in a way. So if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And we really come from a fear too, where everything that you do, it is in a way to avoid something. It's not, what would you like to do so that you are happy and fulfilled? It is, if you don't go to school and you don't pass, you are going not to be a happy person. So it's like to try and avoid all of these things, you do this. So it's never, the way we even approach or get motivated tends to be very negative. And when I mentioned the shame thing, it isn't a bad thing. Sometimes we have to use an example and to say, hey, such and such person did this well. It would be nice if you do the same thing. But what that does is it tells the person on the receiving end that they're not good enough. And it tells them that there's something wrong with them. And you don't realize at the moment when it's said. You might actually respond to it and say, nah, that's not true. But that has created something in you that continues to grow with other messaging that you get from other places. And it will continue to be in place unless we start doing things differently. So my mom said to my nephew, thank you for cleaning the table. You are a good boy. My response was, no, you did a great job on cleaning the table. Your kindness and who you are is not contingent on your ability to clean a table. She looked at me like, huh? And I was like, yeah, if we start evaluating kids on how good they are at doing a table or cleaning a table, we're setting him up for failure in a long term, because he's only a good boy when he does what you want.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't, then he's no longer a good boy. So then that's the shame part, where I'm a bad person, I'm not good enough because I did XYZ. Whereas he's allowed to feel guilty, but he's not allowed to shame himself because of a particular experience. And we do those things not even realizing the impact that they're going to have. The other one is even the fact that our parents can look at us and we know what to do. And we just run and do what it is that we're expected. Why isn't that being communicated? Why do I have to read between the lines? So then we're not creating a space where we can express our emotions. We learn that our emotions are not safe. We learn that our emotions are not valid and they're not important. So then it comes to have an impact on our relationships, not only with our own kids, but also with our spouses or people that we work with or we interact with. Because if someone says, hey, do you want coffee or tea? I'm just going to be like, oh, whatever. And then the day I decide that I actually want to express what I want, it's going to feel very foreign because I'm not used to even allowing myself to know or express what my needs are.
Noreen?
Yes.
You need to write a book. Or, you know what? You speak too fast. These things, just one sentence, I'm like blown away. And then it's the next. I'm still at, we are allowed to feel guilty, but we should not feel shamed. Like, don't put being a good boy and good girl on your kids. And I'm just looking back at my own childhood and I'm like, how many things did I feel that I'm doing this for your approval or I'm doing this to be a good girl? But in essence, it wasn't really being a good girl or good boy. It was just good for you.
Yeah.
But it's not good generally. And I'm sorry to say, but I also say good girl to my kids instead of saying you did that well, but it does not make you good or bad.
Because the shame part is going to be when you grow up and you make decisions, or even when you come home and your report card is an F. You must be dumb. You are stupid. You don't get to do this because you failed. So then what you learn is you are a failure. You're not someone that, hey, maybe because I didn't study, I failed, but I am the failure. And I'm quoting Brené Brown. According to the data that she has collected, between the ages of 0 and 7, to kids not feeling loved or being unlovable, which is the foundation of like being a failure, almost feels like dying because their world is so small. When my parents don't love me, I might as well not be around. Right? And it's a scary thing to hear and to think about, because when we do things, we don't realize that kids are hearing that I don't care, therefore I don't love you. And if they're not loved, they go back internally and feel like they don't even need to be around, because what would the world look like if I'm that insignificant for you? Then there's no point in me existing. But also these are thoughts that maybe kids don't even have the language to express, and all you see is behavior. And sometimes we respond to behavior because that's what we see, not because that's actually what we need. Sometimes kids also learn that if I act out, that's when I get attention.
And
whereas,
and I completely understand and see that it's so much that we need to unlearn and relearn, and we don't have these tools, we don't know these things. And you know what, we're even almost coming to the end of the live, and I feel like we've just touched the tip and we've not even gone anywhere close to this topic. It's just so packed with so much knowledge. You've really been breaking it down. I just wanted to go through some of the comments and the messages that people are leaving on the group. There's Wuthes joined us, Lorraine from Nairobi, Buhle from Bulawayo, Mazi from the UK, and she's saying just because parents do their best, it doesn't mean that children don't experience it as traumatic. So
Yeah.
it's no one's fault is basically what she's saying. Is that true?
Mhm. Yeah. So here's the thing. Kids don't need excellent parents. They need good enough parents. And as long as you're good enough 2/3 of the time, then you're fine. And this is the part where it is okay to be vulnerable and stop pretending. The biggest thing is our parents gave us this false idea that they had it all figured out and that they were in control of all of these things. So when we realize that they are not, it also breaks us. Whereas if you say to your kids, guys, I have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to figure it out together. Right? And this is like very interesting. Kanyambao said this. This is the first time I'm being your mom, and this is the first time you're being my daughter. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't know what I'm doing. And being able to say something like that puts down the walls to say, hey, mom, when you did that, this is how it made me feel. So then you get to learn from your kids as well, because they are learning from you that this is what's going on for them. I always think of the example of your kid comes home and says, I got bullied at school. The African parent is ready to pick up the broom and run and go beat up those kids so that I can protect my child, right?
Yeah.
If I do that, again, I've taken the child out of Kruger National Park and they never have to do anything. They've learned that as long as they come and report, I will take care of it. Whereas if it's like, okay, what happened? Tell me. Okay, what would you have liked to see? Okay, this and this. So what can we do? Is there anything that we can do? Well, you can always talk to your teacher. You can always do all of this stuff. So then you let them go back into the jungle. They will fail. It's not you failing as a parent. It is them
learning the tools. You're empowering them to do it on their own so that next time they're strong enough for themselves.
Because that's the resiliency that needs to come in place, right? The unfortunate thing is sometimes we become too resilient where we don't actually stop to say, this is wrong. I don't always have to have a response or have to have an answer or feel like I'm in control of it. But resiliency is the beginning of being able to go into the environment, learn, but know that there's someone that's always there for me to come back and check into. And that is the thing that makes a difference for kids when they experience trauma, is if there's one healthy adult that comes into the picture to help them, to support them through it, then it changes how they actually turn out in the long run.
Wow. Yeah, we've spoken a lot about childhood trauma, but I just wanted to quickly touch on this before we close today. There are women who've been raped. There are women who've had miscarriages. There are women who've had children dying in their arms or just experiencing death of spouses, parents. There's so much trauma. There's so much we've gone through. How do we start addressing the big T's, the very difficult moments in our life, those things that we feel define us? How, if we just learned one thing today, what would you let women go home with? What message can we give them?
That's a tough one. And part of it is because everyone is going to be different, right? But we have to be willing to say, this bothered me, this impacted me, and it is changing how I'm responding. It's changing how I'm looking at the world. We cannot expect that we're going to experience or go through all of these things and not be changed. Sometimes the changes are not visible to the next person, and sometimes the changes are not even visible to us. And how we begin to actually address those is to normalize that going through a traumatic event isn't a life sentence. It's not something that comes to define you. And the difference being sometimes we take the labels and we become the label. We're not the labels of the things that we go through. I can experience trauma. I can be changed by trauma, but I'm not my trauma. And so when I begin to talk about it, I also start the healing. And I'm not talking about it expecting that the world around me is ready or willing to embrace me. But my healing comes from actually talking about it. Whether you talk by journaling for yourself, whether you talk by finding safe spaces where you can talk about it, that in itself is beginning the healing process for you.
Thank you so much, Noreen. Women really are looking to heal, and they don't have the tools, they don't have the courage, but you've really encouraged me that this is something we don't have to put over our heads. We don't have to say that this is me. This is my label. I am the rape that happened 5 years ago. I am the miscarriage that happened. We are not our labels, and we can heal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. The crying child is here. I don't know who unleashed them. Let me just complete. We have another comment. Can you please ask if this is always a bad thing in regards to crying? Is it wrong to try and manage your feelings? Because let's say in a work environment, you can't put your feelings on show. So how do you handle that?
Yeah. If you're managing your feelings because you are aware that this is not how you want to express yourself at the moment, then it's fine. Where it becomes a problem is I'm managing my feelings so that the other people are less uncomfortable, so that the other people don't have to deal with me, right? It's not about other people. If it is you're managing yourself and then you also do allow yourself to actually cry when you get home, then we're fine.
Okay.
It is not where I stop myself from ever feeling where it becomes a problem.
And Mazi also says, but still when we teach our children, we also pass on our own fears, coping mechanisms, and tips on how to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do?
An anxious parent will raise an anxious child. That's because as a parent, you have your own fears about the world. You have your own responses to trauma that you're already dealing with. So you're going to give those to your child. Here is an example. For someone that says, if you go outside, this is what's going to happen. Sorry, I just literally thought of an example. My mom's lovely response to sexual education was simply these three, it's a sentence probably. If you talk to a boy, you are going to get pregnant. If you get pregnant, you're going to get AIDS. She was done. So to me today, knowing what I know, that was reflecting on her own fears, her own experiences, rather than actually having that conversation to be like, okay, this is what it looks like and this is what happens, right? And instead of having that conversation, she put the fear onto me. And what we do is we go back and we reflect. We go back and say, hey, so last time I said this, and this is the reason behind why I said it. Because sometimes we do the grand statement or the gestures, but we forget to actually give the background as to why we're doing what we're doing. And that's the missing piece. The missing piece isn't that your kids won't see you be anxious or you won't express your feelings or your fears to your kids. It is the reason why you do them so that they have an understanding of why that is that way. They don't just continue to do it without an understanding of why they're doing it.
Wow, thank you so much. I've learned so much about being vulnerable in front of your kids. I've even let them come into the Zoom and they were playing with the makeup and the lotion. So look, I'm also figuring it out. And I think,
and that's it. That's it.
and
And
fine. It's fine.
it's fine. Well, here's what I'm going to say to end. I don't see it as that makes you any less of a great parent. And I think the shift also has to happen with how we all perceive each other as women and how we even have those conversations about it, right? So it doesn't take away from you because your kids were playing with makeup. Let them be creative. Let them go with it. Does it say, hey, my makeup was expensive? Yes. That touches on it. It's fine. But you as a mother, as a professional, that doesn't take away from you because that identity is not attached to it. It is something that you're doing.
Thank you so much for the validation. I feel like I've had therapy today. I certainly feel healed. I feel validated, empowered to reach out and just be, you know, a courageous person to be healed. And I think a lot of women have learned about those steps to take towards being healed. Thank you so much, Noreen. I think we'll continue this conversation on the platform. I'm sure there's people, how do people get in?